Okay, so this week we are opening up Unit 4, which is titled The Early Republic. And this week in particular, we're talking about politics and the division between the two political parties during this time period. So we title it Political Division in the Early Republic. And the division we talk about is mainly between two parties, the Federalists and the Republicans. And the Republicans are like the New Age anti-Federalists, if you remember us talking about them during the Constitution. So anti-Federalist, Republican, pretty much the same thing. We have two groups here, obviously, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. They both lead their parties against each other, and through the first 12 to 16 years of our country's history, these two are heading up the opposition against one another. Okay. Now, in the election of 1788, we have George Washington and John Adams. They finished first and second in running for the president. And during this time, the second place winner, John Adams in this case, would become the vice president. Okay, and part of the presidential cabinet, obviously, automatically. Now, the Federalists, during this election of 1788, take enormous power in Congress and also, obviously, in the executive because they won. But 44 Federalists in Congress take control of seats, and only 9 anti-Federalists / future Republicans take their seats. And so you have the Federalists in enormous power and control. And Washington's cabinet was full mostly of Federalists. Edmund Randolph, Henry Knox, and Alexander Hamilton, who's standing up there in the back. The one person who was part of that opposition party, though, was Thomas Jefferson. Okay, now Washington did not believe in the whole political thing, and that's part of his allure throughout history is he was apolitical. But Thomas Jefferson there and Alexander Hamilton being in the same working group during this time was very volatile. The two did not like each other. They disagreed with each other very often, and that's really what the story of this presentation is about today. Okay, now the first area they disagree is how to deal with the economic challenges of America. The country is deeply in debt from the Revolution. We've talked about that many times, and inflation is wreaking havoc on the economy during this time. And it's Alexander Hamilton's job as Treasury Secretary to deal with this. And his plan is to obviously pay the debt down in order to sort of gain the confidence of the other countries in the world and to be considered legitimate. The country has to pay down its debt. If it can't pay its debt down in a reasonable amount of time, then it's hard to believe that our country's economy and our country as a whole is worth taking seriously. So Hamilton realizes that's an important job. Now, in order to do that, he realized he has to probably raise taxes on Americans and create a national bank to sort of run all of this. And that's what his plan is all about. When we talk about the national debt, what his plan was and what he ended up doing was taking the individual debts of each state they had built up during the war, from New York, Delaware, Georgia, North Carolina, and so on, all these different states, and taking their debt from them and putting it into a pool. And you would say, wow, that's great for the states because, we're giving up our debt so that now it's in this big pool that the country will pay off as a whole. And Hamilton's plan is to raise taxes to pay down that now national debt. And again, this seems like, okay, well, I'll just kind of chip in and we'll help to pay down the debt. The one group that sort of opposed all this and the idea of a national bank were the southern states. Many of them said, we had already paid down most of our debt, and we don't think it's fair that now we're going to get taxed to pay down other states' debt. And that didn't really make sense to southern states, so that kind of ticked them off a little bit. And the other part of it, because many of these states, the southern states, were also Republican majority and didn't believe in a big national government, they said there's nothing in the Constitution that says that you're allowed to have a national bank. And so Jefferson leads that opposition against Hamilton over this whole idea of a new national bank. And Jefferson loses this battle against Hamilton because Congress, who's, remember, led by the Federalists, approves Hamilton's plan. Okay, and Washington is also on board. So Washington, doesn't take the advice of Thomas Jefferson, takes the advice of Hamilton, and Jefferson kind of has a little bit of egg on his face from this, and is embarrassed publicly because of it. But another issue that we're going to talk about that, again, divides the politics of America during this time is the French Revolution, a foreign war. You have a group of common people that rose up to overtake their king. It took about 3 years to do it, but they got it done. Okay, now America says, that's great. We did the same thing in our country. But what they start to have a problem with is this new French Republic begins killing people. They kill the wealthy elite. They put them in guillotines and chop their heads off, and 20,000 people are killed. And people in America are like, well, this isn't really what we support your freedom and all, but we don't really support you killing people. And then this new government starts to declare war on England, and America's like, okay, we really don't want to get involved in these wars because we just got done fighting our own, and we kind of want to chill out and just kind of exist for a while before we start declaring war on people. But you had a group of Republicans who sort of their tagline is really like liberty, life, and the pursuit of happiness. Though all the creeds that we've talked about, from the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the Republicans strongly believe, and they believe we should continue to support the French Revolution, and even sending money and troops to help them fight their war against the British. And that's the Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson. But the Federalist side, with Hamilton and Washington and Adams, say, you know what? This revolution's getting a little too weird for us, so we're gonna quit supporting them. And they decide to stay neutral in the war between France and England. And they said, we're just not going to get involved, period. And when Washington makes that decision, and this is 1794, Jefferson takes that as the opportunity to resign. He's realized Washington's not going to take my advice here. He didn't take my advice over the National Bank. I'm done being part of this cabinet. Okay. Now, so he's off on the sideline. He's no longer in the cabinet, but another crisis hits the presidency, and that's the Whiskey Rebellion. Hamilton's new tax and way to pay down the debt has also led to an increase in the price of whiskey because of the things that are now taxed. And just like the Sugar Act in the 1760s that we talked about leading up to the Revolution, Americans begin to hold on tight to their liquor and say, if you're going to raise the price of this liquor, you're going to have a fight in your hands. And that's exactly what happens. You have thousands of people that begin protesting the federal government, saying very nasty things about the Federalists and their pursuit of power. And so Hamilton and Washington believe this is a threat to us. We need to do everything we can to protect the integrity of the federal government. We've issued a tax. They need to pay it, and protesting it is unacceptable. So they send 13,000 troops to squash this small rebellion of people, and it really angers the Republican side and Jefferson, who say, hold on a second, in the First Amendment, people are allowed to protest peacefully and petition their government, and that's exactly what they're doing, and they're being told they can't do it. And so Jefferson, once again, disagrees with Washington and Hamilton, and this further divides the two political parties. Okay. Now he has a chance to get his revenge, so to speak, in 1796 in the election for president. But he loses to John Adams, who becomes president, and Jefferson himself becomes vice president. And once again, we have an issue of a Federalist president, a Republican vice president, and the madness that ensues. And Adams is not in favor of supporting the French Revolution, which is still going on during this time, and Jefferson is in favor of helping them. So they are different on that. What begins happening is Jefferson starts to, and we learn this later in history, he starts to hire writers who say terrible things about John Adams. Jefferson secretly is opposing Adams's stance on the French Revolution, and Adams is coming under enormous criticism from the immigrant community in America and from Republicans. And so that leads John Adams to create the Alien and Sedition Acts. Obviously, Congress approves them all, and there are 4 laws basically. Because so many people that were criticizing him were immigrants, he made it a law that took longer to become a citizen, almost twice as long as it used to. It went from 5 to 14 years. It gave him the right to kick out immigrants, and it restricted people's rights to criticize the government. If you were going to say nasty things about the president or anyone in the government, you were going to be thrown in jail. And so Adams took a very hard line here, and the Republicans, sort of baited him into doing this, and now the Republicans attack him for doing it. And they say he's against the First Amendment, he doesn't believe in the Constitution, he's a president in pursuit of becoming a king, and this just is like a snowball effect. The more against the French Revolution, the more against the Republicans, and these crazy laws of the Alien and Sedition Acts, the more this all happens, Adams grows more and more unpopular. Okay, and this leads to Jefferson in 1800 becoming the new president. Okay, and John Adams doesn't even finish in the top 2. He finishes below Thomas Jefferson and a guy named Aaron Burr. And the election between these two was a tie between Aaron Burr and Jefferson, both Republicans. and Jefferson ends up breaking that tie, which we'll talk about later in our textbook. I'm not going to get too much into it now. But we call this really the Republican Revolution because before Jefferson actually becomes president, two states, Kentucky and Virginia, nullify, which is they're not going to follow the Alien and Sedition Acts, and they do that successfully. Okay, so they refuse the power of the federal government, which is a huge step for any state to take, and a real victory for Republicans and those people that value states' rights. Jefferson wins the election of 1800, as we just said, and becomes the new president. And by 1802, that Republican majority in Congress now has overturned the Alien and Sedition Acts. So this is a huge victory for Republicans and really has changed the politics of American government at the time. Now, the story of the guy, Aaron Burr, who finished second to Thomas Jefferson, continues on, and it's one of the real great sagas of American history because Aaron Burr is a guy from New York. He, is a career politician, a very intelligent person, but has always sort of finished second in everything, except one thing. So in 1791, he runs for a congressional seat in New York and unseats and defeats Alexander Hamilton's father-in-law. Okay, and this begins his feud with Alexander Hamilton in 1791, where Hamilton is a constant thorn in Aaron Burr's side. So that victory, Hamilton almost took as a personal affront and made it almost his life mission to make Aaron Burr's life miserable. In 1800, when the tie between Aaron Burr and Jefferson was going on, they went through multiple ballots to figure out who the winner was going to be, and it took a very long time. And Hamilton finally came out and said, even though I hate Jefferson and I don't like him, I don't like his politics, I don't like him as a person, I would rather see Jefferson as president any day than Aaron Burr. And the people that had been voting against Jefferson switched their votes to vote for him because of what Alexander Hamilton had to say. And Aaron Burr obviously was ticked at this and made it basically an issue between himself and Alexander Hamilton, where they also did not like each other. And then in 1804, 4 years later, you have Aaron Burr running to become governor of New York, and Alexander Hamilton writes terrible things in newspapers and creates this campaign to prevent Aaron Burr from becoming the governor of New York. And this is in 1804, and Aaron Burr ends up losing the governorship of New York. So again, Alexander Hamilton has come up to basically make his life a living heck. So what Aaron Burr does, he says, you know what, let's handle this like men. And in Weehawken, New Jersey, he challenges Alexander Hamilton to a duel, and they go out on the dueling grounds with their guns, take their steps, turn around, and shoot. And Aaron Burr puts a bullet in Alexander Hamilton and kills him. This is 1804. And so, if we think politics are bad now, at least these guys aren't going to the dueling grounds and shooting each other when they disagree. But it is a significant moment in 1804 because in this time, where we stand as a country is that Republicans have now taken power. 16 years after getting humiliated by the Federalists in the first election, they have now gained power and traction in American politics. Okay, states' rights have been strengthened with the actions of Virginia and Kentucky standing up to the federal government. This empowers states and their mission to better their lives and the people that live in their states, and Republicans support that. Okay, and the third part of that is Hamilton, through this entire process, was embarrassed. He was unsuccessful in many political ventures. He went from being, the starlet of the 1790s at the beginning with this huge financial plan being approved to challenging Aaron Burr unsuccessfully and dying as a result of that. But more importantly, by 1804, the age of Jefferson had begun, where the 19th century was beginning with a new president, the author of the Declaration of Independence, one of the great statesmen in American history, and Jefferson's able to fully implement his vision for America during this time period, which leads him to purchase basically the West and the rest of the American continent, known as the Louisiana Purchase. He's able to successfully navigate through the French and the British fighting each other. But by the end of what we call the Age of Jefferson, the War of 1812 will have taken place, and America would have sort of cemented itself as a new power in the world. Okay, so we've talked about a lot today. This is a big week with just tons of stuff we're going to be talking about, dealing with politics and these two political parties to start off with. So if you have any questions, make sure you let me know. Tweet me, email, make sure you're asking questions if you're not understanding things. But